Hi everyone, welcome to the last lecture for COMP1531 in 22T2. It has been a wild ride together, and I can thank you for that. When we started this course, a couple of things happened. Firstly, we told you that you were the first cohort that's ever done 1531 in T2, so congratulations to you for sticking that through. And secondly, you were part of a big fun change we had to the course, which has been, in the making for a while, which was to move the course over to JavaScript. And I can tell you that having, kind of seen this course through to the end now, myself and, many of your tutors are very glad that we got to help you experience this, because it is certainly what we consider to be a good change, and we're excited to see how for many of you it pays dividends in the future, in the coming months and a couple of years. So don't forget about us, because we won't forget about you. This final lecture today is about the exam. It's only about the exam, and it's going to be pretty brief again. We told you at the start of the course that we hit you pretty hard with work early on in the course, and we try and ease off towards the end of the course, and today will be no exception. So just to recap that, in the final week here, 10.1, this lecture is on the exam, and the final two lectures are some topics around, I guess, full stack, building products out in the real world. The first one is about web front end. So if you've used the front end in the project and you think that sounds interesting, we can give you a taste of it in a pre-recorded lecture from 21T3, I think. And then for 10.3, building a minimum viable product, that's a lecture that I gave, that I kind of give here and there, and I gave one that I liked to the DESN 2000 cohort in week 9, I think, in week 9. So because they got a taste of that, figured it was better to just provide you with what was said to them rather than, go and pre-record a whole thing. So those two things you don't have to watch. In fact, if you're a busy, stressed person, I'd encourage you even to not watch them, because you've probably got better things to do. But for those who are curious, please go ahead. Now, today's lecture is going to be pretty much two things. One is, it's just one thing even. It's going to be reading through the Web CMS3 exam page. The Web CMS3 exam page is the page with all of the information pertaining to the exam. It's the official page for that. Now, I'm just going to step you through this bit by bit. There's a little bit to unpack here. Obviously, you can read it, but I like to take the time. There may be a couple of typos that we discover throughout this lecture that we might have to update, because courses change in small ways every term, and this page is easy to fall out of whack, but we'll get to that as we do. The very first thing about your final exam is a reminder about UNSW's requirement of the fit to sit rule. The fit to sit rule essentially says that by starting an exam, you are well enough to do so. So if you wake up on the exam day at 7 a.m. and you feel sick or unwell enough that you would normally apply for special consideration, or something that prevents you from doing the exam, don't start the exam. You can skip the exam, apply for special consideration, and sit the supplementary exam. However, if you do start the exam, even if you started feeling feeling bad before the exam, you kind of waive your right to special consideration. So it's kind of like, if you don't feel well, don't sit the exam and apply for special consideration. If you're not sure if that's you, or you're not sure about your personal situation, then simply email me or post on the forum on the exam day, and I'll be able to help out, So that should be totally fine. Very happy to help in that regard. Now, if you do for some reason suddenly feel ill during the exam, then you can just email me and stop too. We have this situation, we've had students there have been family emergencies, something terrible has happened with their health in the middle of the exam. It's not that if you start the exam and something goes wrong, that you're in trouble. It's that if you stop the exam because you're unwell after it starts, it has to be because of something that began after it started. You know, so if your house catches on fire or something at 7 a.m., don't sit the exam. Don't start the exam, get halfway through and say, yeah, but my house caught on fire this morning, so I feel crap. And this rule essentially just exists to prevent people from having an excuse not to do the exam, but essentially doing the exam just to see how they go and then realize that they're not doing as well as they'd like and stopping, you know? So it's really just all about that. Very straightforward. Now, in terms of the date, time, and duration of the exam, the final exam will be a 3-hour exam, and it will begin at 8:30 a.m. and end at 11:30 a.m. I've already noticed an error here. Not Australian Eastern Daylight Time, but Australian Eastern Standard Time. We're in T2, so it is not daylight savings right now in Sydney. Basically, you don't have to worry about this change, but like technically this is incorrect because daylight savings hasn't started yet. Web CMS 3 is really slow to edit, taking its time. So it's 8:30 till 11:30. Now, normally these morning exams start at 9. I am sorry about the fact that it's 8:30, not 9. I'm a morning person nowadays, but for most of my life I wasn't, so I can understand your pain. The reason it's at 8:30 is quite simple. There's another course in CSE that uses GitLab quite extensively, and it's running at the same day as ours in the morning. And we don't want to start them at the same time because we don't want GitLab to get too much work. And when we were deciding whose exam would like start at 8:30 and whose exam would start later, I talked to the other course and we looked at the number of international students in the course, and their course had more international students in it. So I said we'll go earlier because international students, particularly the ones in Indoasia, like, China, India, and the whole Southeast area, they're the ones who feel the pain of early morning exams much more than domestic students. So that's why it's 8:30. If you do live if you live in the Asia Pacific region, like Indo-Asia area, we generally expect you to just get up earlier, get up for a 6:30 exam or something. But if you live in Europe in particular, I don't know how many of you would live in Europe, then you can email me and we can sort out an alternative exam time, because Europe is not really a tenable time to have an exam there. The exam does finish at 11:30 a.m. However, if you've read the last notice, depending on the My Experience completion rates we get, for every 1% after over the My Experience completion rate, we will give you an extra 1 minute for the final exam. So if we do get 60% of people fill in My Experience, we will give an exam length of 3 hours and 15. So this time here of 11:30 a.m. is kind of like tentative based on that. So it's like it'll essentially be somewhere between, we're not going to get over 85% of people fill it out. It's just not going to happen. Or even 75 might be a stretch. So it's basically like 8:30 till somewhere between 11:30 and 12. Time will tell. You will tell me, technically. So keep an eye on that. Okay, now for the structure of your final exam, the exam will be worth 100 marks, but marks are just made up things. What matters is that your exam is worth 20% of the course. That's the assessment percentage that you walk away with that really matters. 15 kind of marks is that 100. 15% of the exam are going to be short answer questions, very similar to tutorial questions. They're going to be asking you about kind of theoretical things that we can't really test you to code. It'll all be short answer. It's not going to be multiple choice. It's not going to be writing essays, and we're not going to ask you to draw stuff. It's essentially a series of 1 to 3 mark questions asking you to explain or compare or justify or something like that. And then most of the exam, 85 marks or 85% of the exam, is programming questions where we ask you to write code. They'll be very similar to lab questions, though in a way probably a bit easier than lab questions, because lab questions are a bit harder. Some of them might require you to do HTTP based stuff, like with Express. We will ask you to use Jest in the exam, and we'll award you marks for like testing and coverage, etc., etc. And you are welcome to use ESLint, but we won't award you marks for doing it. Now, to the question of, or to the comment about, oh, it's easier than lab. So this page was written for previous versions of the course I ran where labs were easier. There were more labs. Like every week, instead of getting these like 2 hard or 3 hard questions, we'd give students like 3 to 6 easier questions. So when we say it's like similar to lab questions, it's kind of going to be easier than lab questions. And it's a basic idea for the exam. I want to ask you questions in the exam, but I need them to be big enough that when we check for plagiarism, the questions are unique enough that it's reasonable that 2 students could not get the same answer exactly. But I want the exam questions to be small enough such that if you can't answer it, you don't feel stressed because now you can't answer like a quarter of the questions or something like that. Now, the good news is that, again, when I took over 1531, the exam was 50%, managed to get it down to 35% in like T3 or something. Now we're down to 20. High five, right? That's good news for you because it means that this exam is the least stressful it's ever going to be, has ever been for students. So, even if you can only do half the exam, that's only 10% of the course, which is far better a position than you could be previously. Theo asked a good question. Can we use, say, wrapper functions from our labs or techniques from labs whilst doing the exam? Yes, you can. You can use any labs, any lecture code. You can pretty much use any code from the course verbatim, as in like copy and paste it. And code from the internet you can't really copy because it's plagiarism, but you can be inspired by it, I guess. Obviously, with the exam being 20%, there is no hurdle for the exam, as in you can score 0% in the exam. In fact, there are many students in this course who will be able to not turn up to the final exam, get 0 in the exam, and then pass the course because they've gotten enough marks already. So this is the other benefit I like about these smaller exams, is that most of you will go into the exam knowing that you've passed the course. You can put 1531 behind you. It's really just a question of what your final mark is going to be. Even if you haven't fully passed the course, like even if you're only on like 46 out of 80, most of you know how to score 4 out of 20 in an exam. So that's okay. Completing the exam. So the exam will be run on GitLab. It'll be run just like a lab, or it'll be run just like the sample exam, which we'll look at soon. And you can complete it locally, or you can complete it on VLab. It's quite literally just like a lab. Like there are questions, you can code it on VLab, you can code it on SSH, VS Code, you can code it locally. It's up to you, because at the end of the day, when you finish the exam, we're going to ask that you push your code back up to GitLab. We also ask that you check it works in a VLab environment, but that's more so like make sure it works with like the right node version. Basically, like I don't want to scare people, because there's people in this course who say been working locally the whole course, and the point is, like, if you've been working locally the whole course and you have the right node version that we have in the course, and you haven't had any issues in the course with auto markers and stuff, then like you're totally fine. But otherwise keep an eye on that. If you are working locally, you will need to you'll need to have all the standard environment things set up, like Node and Jest and everything else. Well, not really like set up, because Jest you npm install, but you'll need like Node and Git, obviously, and you will need like some kind of API client like ARC for certain questions. This line here I will probably remove. This is the line this was something we started off at the start of the course where we were like, we'll only let students use certain libraries. I'm just going to, yeah, I'll remove that. But basically, it's like the labs in the project. This course does not rely heavily on the use of libraries because we ask you relatively simple things. But you can install any ones you want. If you can install it with npm install, then it's good enough to use. Though the one caution and the one thing to be careful of there is just there's occasionally a really weird library that people have installed that's like a super big, super obscure library that no one else has used, and it's got some obscure bug in it. So if you're not sure, you can always post on the forum during the exam. Technical issues related to the CSE machines that are out of your control can be grounds for extra time or special consideration, but technical issues relating to your local environment cannot be. There are always chances that something goes wrong with VS Code SSH, right? Maybe the VS Code server goes down or something like this. They are not going to be grounds for special consideration either. What we would like from you in those situations is to just use VLab. So we will expect that if there are issues with SSH VS Code that you use VLab or another alternative. If there are issues with VLab out of your control, then we will give extra time and stuff appropriately. But the point is, it's a requirement that you are familiar with VLab for the exam and that you should be prepared to complete the exam on VLab if you need to. Don't leave it till the last minute to push your code to master. Submit each question as you work on it. That just means that commit and push, every 15, 20 minutes. Don't just like wait right until the end and push everything and and it all explodes. So just be careful and cautious of that. Okay, during the exam. The exam is an open book exam. That means you're able to use the internet and any other resources to their full extent, except for other humans. Whenever I run exams, I like to remind people that you need to imagine during the exam, it's like you have full access to the internet, but everyone else on the planet is dead. They're not here, they're gone. So you can't like message your friends at Google and ask them questions. You can't message other 1531 students, but you're welcome to Google stuff as much as you know. I always get the question, how will you know if we're messaging our friends? Well, we don't, but trust me, people have a way of finding out. I don't know how this magic happens, but it does. So just be very careful about that. You are prohibited from seeking help from other students, obviously, as I just said, and any communication after you or another person has started the exam time will result in a 0 fail for the course. This is really important. Don't make the mistake of trying to cheat on this exam. Every single term, there are, 10 to 5 to 20 students that cheat. They share code or they had code shared with them, and we give them a 0, and in many cases, we are happy to fail students if we need to. This is a 20% exam. And I know, no matter what I tell some people right now, that there are people here who will try and cheat and they will try and get caught. And the only thing I can tell you, the only human rationale I can tell you is if you have passed the course, you are a moron if you cheat on this exam, because you have gone from passing the course and trying to get a higher mark at the risk of having to repeat the course. And we will find you. It's really easy to tell if people cheat in this exam. Happens every term. Every time I've ever taught, we find people, and there's a bunch of them. They're like, I didn't think I'd get caught. I thought I had reverse engineered their code, or I had copied it and changed it enough. It's like, no, there are very advanced things that are used to figure some of these things out. Don't think we just look for code that looks identical. There are more things at play there. So plagiarism, cheating, very bad. You will get a 0. Don't do it. The exam is worth way too little to cheat. So next, if you have questions or you need clarifications during the exam, you'll actually be able to make a private post on our forum. We will actually be using the same course forum for the final exam. So it'll be exactly the same. You log into the forum, you ask a question. It's just that for the final exam, we make all the posts private. So that means that you can't see other students' posts, basically, which is totally normal. Do not message lecturers or tutors on MS Teams. Do not email lecturers or tutors about issues that are not of a sensitive nature. Basically, during the exam, the only time you should do everything on the forum, post everything there, the forum, and the only time you should email me is essentially if something so bad has happened that you are having to stop the exam. Hi Hayden, my mum's just had a stroke. Can't complete the exam right now. Send in the ambulance. I mean, if that happens, maybe don't email me. Maybe go look after your parents. But something like that, right? Like, don't email me being like, "I got this problem. I don't know what this means." Post on the forum for that, because that's what me and other tutors are checking quite closely. Whereas email is something that is checked a little less frequently and will be responded to less frequently. When you are posting a message to the forum during the final exam, please make sure your answer is detailed. Make sure that you have your recent code on GitLab if that's necessary. Show screenshots of the issue. Explain how you produced the issue. Just be very clear. Take that extra 30 seconds to explain yourself. There's a really common mistake where students are so panicked and rushing, they ask a really crappy question. And when we answer questions on the final exam, there's basically like a queue where like if you go like post, and we'll answer your post. And then if 5 other people make new posts and then you respond to the original post, we will answer those 5 first. You know what I mean? So there's like a queue as people post or respond. So it will actually take you longer to get an answer if we have to come back to you seeking clarification. So, be very thoughtful about your reply. It doesn't have to be hundreds of words or anything like that. It's more just like many of you have seen it. There are forum posts where we answer it, and there are forum posts where me or another tutor are like, "Can you explain yourself a bit, please?" So just be wary of that. If there are clarifications to the exam made during the course, we will update the spec of the exam on GitLab, and I will send you an email. And during the exam, all communication will happen via email. Don't email me at 8:28 saying, when's the exam starting? The exam is starting at 8:30. That is when you will receive an email at 8:30. I also do announcements on Ed so that, you get like 2 emails. So, make sure you're on the forum. Brendan says, wait, what can you ask non-technical related questions? Yeah, I mean, you get students ask questions like, well, it depends what you mean by technical. I mean, we don't really want you asking technical questions. Like, the only questions that should come up on the forum are spec clarifications, where we usually either clarify it, or a common answer you will get if you ask for spec clarifications is that we believe the spec is clear enough. I understand sometimes it's frustrating because you read the spec and you think, I want to clarify, I'm pretty sure what they mean, but I want to clarify what they mean. So then you ask a question, but we can't kind of answer you without disadvantaging other people who haven't had the benefit of that extra explanation. So either we go and explain it further and email everyone, or often we just say, read the spec again. You have to, it's an exam, you have to take your best guess as to what we're referring to. And we write the exam, we check the exam, we get tutors sitting the exam before the exam. So things are relatively well checked before the exam. So it's usually either that, or it's like, I'm having a problem like NPM can't be found, help. There is no submit command for the final exam, so there is no like 1531 submit. It's like the labs. All you have to do is push your code to master, and whatever's on master at the end of the exam is what we mark. That's really that. During the exam, here's a few troubleshooting tips. You can look at this now or later. It's just around VLab and SSH, VS Code and stuff. And then preparing for the exam, the easiest way to prepare, firstly, preparing for the exam. You've been preparing for the exam the entire term. This is one exciting thing about computer science courses versus other courses. Every time you've done a lab, every time you've done the major project, you are preparing for it. And in fact, the final exam, besides the short answer stuff, which is probably worth going through the lecture slides a bit, but even then, like, let me take a step back. The final exam is designed such that if you've been to lectures and watched lectures and you've done your labs and you've contributed to the project, you have nothing to prepare. You can just rock up and do as well as you're capable. The most practice you need to do is essentially where you feel like you haven't gotten there. So if you haven't done some labs, go back and do them. If you've forgotten some labs, maybe go back and take a look. If you've forgotten some lectures, maybe go back and glance through. But also, it's an open book exam. It's very easy for you to go and have a look at lecture slides during the exam. Knowing the content back to front, knowing the programming back to front is just going to save you time. If everything you don't have to Google or search up is just going to save you time in the exam. Jack says, so no algorithm style questions. No, they're going to be very straightforward, kind of like, there's going to be a bunch of solve this small problem and test it in the exam. It's honestly a very light exam. Why do we have an exam? It's a good question. Well, we're slowly trying to gain confidence that the project marking is solid enough to represent students well. In the past, we had a problem where project marks were always too high. So we've been working on that. We never used to have auto marking. When I first ran this course, there was no auto marking. It just used to be like tutors looking at the code. So, things like auto marking have helped bring marks down. So eventually we won't need the exam. The other reason we actually have the exam is that it really helps us weed out the students who lied throughout the project. So for instance, students who this happens, I shit you not. Students will pay their friends sometimes, or ask their friends to lie for them, or ask their friends to do GitLab commits for them. To essentially get free marks, and that's obviously not very fair. So the exam's a great way to make sure that people know their stuff. Because honest to God, if you are watching this and you did not do anything in the project, but you've pretended you have, and you don't know the content, the exam will find you. And if you're sitting there being like, I don't know anything, no, that's just you feeling like you're not very smart, but I'm sure you're very smart. I'm talking about people who done nothing the whole term and really done nothing. Not I struggle with the content, because that's 90% of you struggle with the content. 5% are struggle as in, it's a challenge that you rise to. 5% are having a great time because they're geniuses. 5% are cheating or doing some dodgy stuff, or these are just numbers, don't overthink them. But the gist is the same. So reviewing the tutorials and labs and the lectures are super great, easy done. Reviewing the practice questions, also easy, done. And then there's a sample exam. The sample exam is where you can get a sense of the scope of the exam. Now, the purpose of the sample exam is not to, how would you put it? It is not an exact, we don't make this to give you more questions. A really common thing I get from students is, I want more sample exams. It's you don't need more sample exams. You have labs and everything else. You've got tons of stuff. The point of the sample exam is not to give you questions, it's to give you a sense of the scope and the size. This is a sizing exercise here. It is so that you can go, I can understand the shape of what I'm doing. I can understand how complicated these questions might be. I can understand what the short answer questions look like, how much time I might have to spend on them. It's so that you don't accidentally go into the final exam thinking that you need to know a bunch more or a bunch less. So this sample exam you can do at any time. We have solutions somewhere. I'll go and try and sort those out. I have to dig them out because we've had to convert a whole bunch of stuff because of the course change. So yes, the sample exam is super useful, and yes, you can use anything from the sample exam in the final exam that you do submit. Now, I'm just checking if this did work. Oh, looks like it didn't. Okay, I'll have to sort that out tonight. But as part of, for the sample exam, we also have a sample exam repo. And this is just like a lab. It hasn't been deployed to you yet. Let me sort that out after the lecture. But basically, just like a lab, we send out a repo to you all where you do the exam. So there's actually like a repo that's like public, that's not like yours, that's like the whole courses, like the tutorials repo, where we give you the instructions for the exam, but the actual exam you do is done on a personal exam repo, which is like your labs, where we go and create one for all 600 students, and you go and do it on there. That's where you push and stuff. You don't push to the exam spec repo. Okay? Everyone asks every term during the exam. You can't push here. Stop cloning this repository and trying to push to it and then asking me why it isn't letting you push to it. We will send you a repo like the ones you have here. It's not here right now because I think it failed. It will say exam-sample. And for your final exam, it will say exam. And that's where you go and do it. This will all be linked in the spec, just like it is here. And the spec will be emailed to you by me right when the exam starts. If you know how to read and you have email, everything will be very clear to you as to how to deal with the first day, the start of the exam. Well, I think there's a couple things here to sort out around solutions, but the solutions we'll get to in the next few days. But the exam sample is there for you to actually go and play with now. I do actually need to check this is public though. Just let me triple check because it might still be hidden. No one's looking at it because you're all doing your iteration 3, but yeah, it was hiding. You can't see it. All right, I'm sorry. Now you can see it. Apologies. So now you can go and look up, you can go and look this up. Someone said the leaderboard doesn't look good. Okay. How does it look for iteration 3? Oh, is it doing the weird thing? Doesn't like HTTPS? I can't remember. Iteration 3. That's okay. That's a bit hard to tell. Monday's a bit early, but we will see. It's actually not too bad. I mean, I think a bunch of these marks are probably just derived from the fact that we run a lot of iteration 2 tests as well. So if you've done iteration 2, you have a bunch of free marks basically. But yeah, we'll see how it goes in the coming days. I think it's really promising to see those coverage scores so far. Coverage is a lot easier than you expect. As you might be able to start understanding now why the coverage is marked like it is. Anyway, cool. I just thought I'd take a glance at that. So that's really it. We have the sample exam here. You can go and play with it. The final exam looks exactly like this, except there is no sample. And the final repo you get looks exactly like this, except there is no sample. And the questions are obviously different. If you have any questions about the final exam, can you please post them in the chat in the next 2 minutes while I go on the next ramble I'm going to go on, which is my last thing I want to add. And then we'll wrap up the lecture once we've answered all the questions, because that's all we have today. And that is that I just want to make clear to people that the final exam is designed in such a way that the best student in the course can finish it all and do it all perfectly. And then the great students in the course can probably finish it all and not do it all perfectly. And then your average student can probably attempt most questions, and of the questions they attempted, do okay at them all. If you are a middle of the pack student, don't expect to do all of the questions Or if you do them all, don't expect to ace them all. And that's just normal. That's just okay. You have to understand that from an educational perspective, if we have half the cohort getting 100% in the exam, that's a bad way to separate out students. And if we have the whole cohort doing really badly, that's also a bad way to spread out students. So we have an interest in providing a fair exam. That means that you score approximately how you should. Now, if for some reason everyone does terribly on the exam, right? Say like we want students to do, say this is like the exam marks. Say we'd really like students to do, some kind of thing like that. And let's say everyone does something like this. We will just scale students, okay? So if the exam's harder than we expect in terms of like the exam is as hard as it normally is every other term, but let's just say for a second that maybe this exam, maybe the students in this course struggle more this term. We will always just look at scaling. Historically, we've never scaled marks in 1531 because the project marks are always so high. I get asked this all the time. Will we scale marks? There's no plan to scale marks. You don't sit there being like, we will scale marks. If you have a plan to scale marks, then you're planning to fail because your assessments, like good assessment design shouldn't need scaling. But things happen sometimes that are unexpected. The project marks are normally super high and the exam marks are normally super low. They balance each other out. This term, the project is worth like 40% more than it normally was. So therefore, with the project marks are generally quite high and the exam marks are quite low, with a bigger project and a smaller exam, that's normally not a good sign because it means that the marks are not going to be good. However, we have noticed as well that because this is a T2 term, and many of you have just done 1511, students are struggling on average this term more than normal, and the project marks are coming out lower this term than normal. So perhaps the, project marks will be more of what we expect, or if they're actually even lower than makes sense, then we might look at scaling of those. And same for the exam. So the point is that, we have like I couldn't give you numbers, and that would, even if I had numbers, I wouldn't say them, but like we have some target, like, wouldn't it be great if 10% of people got HDs and 20% got distinctions and 25%, and I don't know, 30% got credits and 30% got passes or something like this. And then the rest fail or something like that. If the marks come out that all of you do better than that, I don't like to scale them down. I think that's mean. But if the marks come out lower than that, where only 5% get HDs, and then like 5% get distinction, none of that would be extreme. That won't happen in the slightest. But that's when we look at potentially moving some marks up if we think the assessments have been harder than normal, or if we think they haven't been fair or something similar to that. So that's the background, if that helps, because I know you're all a bunch of curious cats that no doubt think about this stuff. The point is that we're in the business of treating you with respect and your work with respect and treating the cohort fairly. They're the two things we really care about, and we'll try and carry those through. Hello, Clayton says, do you legitimately graph our marks and assess where the scaling is needed visually? Yes. There is a lot, like, final marks are quite I won't go into it in too much detail, but final marks are quite a touchy, soft process. And a good example is like, and I'll just tell you this, right? I can't give you any general rules, but a lot of the time what we'll do is we'll say we'll get some final marks and maybe we'll scale some students or not, like scale the cohort. And then we usually go around the pass-fail line. And usually what we do is we look at a bunch of students who've failed the course, gotten like a 48 or 49, And usually what we do is we actually go back and we like look through their assessments in detail. Like, so even though on paper they've gotten 48 or 49, we go back through their lab marks and their project marks and their peer reviews and their exam results, and we go just for like 4 or 5 people that are right on that line, and we basically go, does this person seem like they should fail? You know, like numbers are numbers, like numbers matter, but it's like sometimes you can just tell. Sometimes you just see students, you're like, this student shouldn't fail. Like, you think this student shouldn't. It just doesn't make sense. Like, if you look at it and you talk to the tutor and you're like, yeah, this is not a bad like, sure, they're not great, but they've done okay. Then sometimes you might scale up a bit more at the lower end, you know, to try and get that right. Sometimes. And other times you look at the people getting a 48 and you'll go, wow, I'm amazed they even got a 48. These are terrible students. They didn't submit any labs. It looks like their tutor might have been really nice to them in the project, you know, and in those cases you don't really change their mark. Again, I'm not a big fan of. I don't like scaling people down. I don't think it's fair. Like, if we set an assessment and we ask you to do something and you do it like we asked, it doesn't make sense to me, and I'm just an idiot, to scale you down, because like, you did what we asked. You know, so if students tend to score very well, then we failed the assessment, and that's on us to not do that again, not on you. You know, it feels weird to take out poor course design on students. You know, like, it's like, oh, we didn't design our assessments right, so we should punish your marks or something like that. Obviously, in some extreme cases, like I have seen courses in the past where like 95% of students are scoring over 80 or something, and like maybe in some extreme cases it makes sense to do that, but just in general, you know, I like, if we get 20% of people getting HDs, we don't like scale you down to like get people out of that HD band. We go, damn it, we didn't do a good job. Let's learn for next time. You know, stuff happens, move on. So, but I'm not in charge of this anyway. Someone else has to sign off on the marks. I'm just an idiot running around guessing things. Okay. That's it from me. I only really got that one question from Hello Clayton. Are there any other questions about the final exam or anything else like that before we wrap up and finish tonight? Jack says, how much of iteration 2 auto tests make up iteration 3 ones? I don't know off the top of my head. I'm actually genuinely sorry. 50% maybe? Like, for iteration 3, we just take the iteration 2 tests and we write more tests based on all the new routes. I just don't know. I didn't write the tests. We got a tutor to do that. So I wouldn't know off the top of my head. But let's call it 50%. That's a nice round number. Any advice for life after 1531? I don't know. You'd have to be more specific than that. Probably the same advice that I'd have for you before 1531. Get 8 hours of sleep. Look after your health. You know. Will I be teaching 2521 again? No, I will not. They have plenty of people for that now. I filled in for someone who was away. Life advices. Any life advice? Sorry, I missed the life advice part. I hate life advice is so contrived generally, but what I would say is that just be excited about everything you do, or like do things you're excited by. Don't sit around thinking about what's good for your career or not. Just do things and do them well. Whether it's a society or a part-time job at Subway, whatever you're doing, try and do the best at it. Stay hungry. Yeah, that's probably a good summary, Jack. It's like, stay hungry. Like, you know, just try your best at stuff. It's very easy to get caught up on like what I should be doing, but you don't know how things are gonna pan out. You know, you don't know. You don't know what that volunteering job you do is. You don't know how the lessons you learn from caring from your sick parent will pan out into the workplace in 3 years. You don't know how you looking after your health or your exercise will become relevant in a project you're doing at another company. Like, you don't know any of this stuff. You can have some good guesses and you can make some good like professional moves or whatever, but the only thing I found is just really good is like, as long as the things you're doing, whether you're forced to or are interested in them, you're trying to learn and do the best you can at them, you'll keep tumbling forward in a direction. So yeah, that's probably one thing I'd say. That's the one commonality I generally see. People that seem to continue to do well are just ones who are, to quote Jack, who just seem to stay hungry in terms of wanting to do better. You know, so challenge yourself to always be the best you can be. I know that's a bit of a cliche, but like, it's true. When people say that, they can kind of mean it in a very dramatic way. But no, I mean just like, you know, in any way possible, boring ways. Anyway, that's pretty much it on that for now. I don't know. The only other thing I'd probably add is, like, many of you are quite young, so don't worry about this yet. But for those of you who are maybe approaching your mid-20s, I made some mistakes underestimating the importance of earning money and saving money. Yeah. Particularly if you're like me and you don't have very wealthy parents or very wealthy networks. Lots of uni students come from like wealthier families with good safety nets. When I say lots, I mean, you know, a non-negligible amount. But you know, if you are from an environment where money's tough, you'll probably be surrounded by a lot of people who tell you to follow your dreams no matter what happens. But sometimes a $200 and something thousand a year job at Jane Street is a good move for a few years. You know, you can always find your passion. You can always delay finding your passion by a few years if such a thing even exists. But you know, that's not a point. That's not a point to be like, go and chase money. I think that's a bad idea. My point is that some people get scared to think financially about their future, but the reality is that for many students, many people, you can't hide from it. So, you know, don't be scared to take that as a serious factor. So, last thing I'll probably just say was the question Brendan says, will I be teaching 60/80 next year? At this stage, yes, but like the default scenario is that I teach 60/80 next year. That could change. It's not that I don't know what's going to happen. That's the plan, and the plan could change. So, yeah, that's really about it. But look after yourselves, number one. That's the main thing. And, yeah, I don't know. Could talk for hours. I'm not going to do that. You've got iterations to do and exams to prep for. But let's wrap up now, because otherwise I'll just be answering a slow trail of questions for a while. Thank you again, all of you, for the term. It's been super thrilling. I had a lot of fun. If you get a chance, thank your tutors. If you get a chance, if you could send an email to Tam or Juliana or Rennie, if you see them on the forum, give them a big thank you. They've been instrumental in the running of this course. I think we've done a good job this term overall. There's always things we want to improve on, but I'm pretty proud of the team, and the three of them have been instrumental in everything. So if kind words take 5 minutes and cost you nothing and have an impact well beyond their well beyond the time it costs you. So, you know, if you're sitting around procrastinating, just click on the forum, click on a tutor's name. You can literally just, I don't know if it'll work here, EdStem, but You can quite honestly just like click on someone's name on Ed. I think maybe you can't because you're students, but you can find their email and just email them and just say thanks for the term. Everything you see with labs and shoots was like held up deeply by Tam. Everything you see with the project was held up deeply by Juliana, and so much stuff around GitLab and some of the more like fundamental running, the auto marking and a few other things, some kind of back officey work was held up by Rennie. If they are your tutors, it's even easier. And just generally, if you've been in a tough group this term, or something else, like also to students who've been in a tough group, like I still talk to your tutors regularly about your situation. Again, you'd be amazed. On any given day, I'm talking at about half a dozen, dozens of students a week in terms of what are we going to do? Their group's bad. How do we make sure their mark is fair? So they care about you. If you've talked to them and you're feeling like they don't care about you, you can always email me. But generally, if you email your tutor 5 minutes again and just say thanks for the term, the 1531 tutors are, and I know this is one of those like constant like, Sydney's the best city in the world, but like, your 1531 tutors really are just the best tutors on average, I think, in the school. Not because of who they are, but because of the work they have to do in the course in terms of like not just teaching you and mentoring students, but like having to get involved in groups and having to like figure out what's what and having to make hard decisions. They do so much more than just turn up and teach every week. There's a lot of work outside of it that goes into it. And I commend them for that. So send them a thanks. You'd be amazed how many of them think they don't do a good job. And they'll think I'm being nice to them sometimes, or they think I just don't know because I wasn't there. So, if you think they did a good job, 1-line email, 60 seconds, you'd be amazed what that does to people. So, yeah. If you want to be tutors, you can apply. There's an email that's sent out to all students about applying for tutoring in the next couple of weeks. So anyway, I'm conscious that it's really fun with the live people here. Lots of fun, but I'm conscious that there are always another 500 or so people watching this lecture just trying to get through it to get to the end so they can get on to the next thing in their life. So I want to wrap up here. Thank you all again. Thanks for the term. It was really lovely to see so many of you in person. I haven't done that since 2020, term 1. And see you around.